Lauren Hayes adjusted the hem of her emerald green evening gown, exhaling slowly as she stepped into the grand ballroom of the International Energy Summit. The space buzzed with the hum of polite conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the low murmur of classical music playing in the background. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a culmination of years of sacrifice, perseverance, and sheer will. She had spent over a decade proving herself in the field of sustainable energy, pioneering advancements that would shape the future of clean power. And now, she was being honored for it, recognized as one of the leading minds in her industry. She should have felt proud, elated even, but beneath the surface, something unsettled her. Maybe it was the weight of the moment, the way it marked a turning point in her life, or maybe it was something deeper, an old wound that still lingered beneath the scars. Needing a moment away from the limelight, Lauren made her way toward the restroom, her heels clicking against the marble floors. She had been preparing for this night for weeks, but the attention felt heavier than expected. As she stepped inside, the cool air provided a brief respite from the warmth of the ballroom. She approached the sink, taking a slow breath, bracing herself for the rest of the evening, and then she saw her, Margaret Hayes, standing in front of the mirror, elegantly dressed, reapplying her signature shade of red lipstick. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. It had been nearly 15 years since she had last seen her mother. In all that time, there had been no calls, no letters, no acknowledgement of her existence. For years, Lauren had convinced herself that she didn't care, that she had built a life far away from the shadows of her past. But standing here now, face to face with the woman who had once dismissed her struggles so easily, she felt an ache she didn't want to admit. For a brief moment, she considered slipping out unnoticed, pretending this never happened. Maybe Margaret wouldn't recognize her. But as their eyes met in the mirror, her mother's hand froze mid-motion, lipstick hovering just above her lips. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before she masked it with the same cool detachment Lauren remembered from childhood. "Lauren," Margaret said, her voice crisp and composed, as if they had merely run into each other at an upscale luncheon rather than after 15 years of silence. Lauren tightened her grip on her clutch, forcing herself to remain calm. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her voice was even, though her chest tightened with old memories. Margaret turned slightly, regarding her daughter with an appraising look. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We've always been involved with organizations that support scientific research." Lauren swallowed the bitter taste in her mouth. Of course, it had nothing to do with her. It was about appearances, prestige, things that had always mattered more than family. "Well," she said, meeting her mother's gaze head-on, "I'm being honored tonight." For the first time, Margaret hesitated, the faintest flicker of surprise breaking through her composed expression. "I see," she said finally, before turning back to the mirror, adjusting her lipstick as if Lauren's success was just another fleeting conversation, something to acknowledge and forget. And in that moment, Lauren knew no award, no recognition, no scientific breakthrough would ever be enough for them. Lauren could still remember the exact moment her world shattered. She had been standing in the grand foyer of the Hayes estate, her fingers gripping the thin acceptance letter from Brighton Technical College like it was a life raft in a storm. The towering ceilings, the crystal chandelier overhead, the marble floors. It all felt suffocating under the weight of her father's disappointment. William Hayes, CEO of Hayes Industries, paced the length of the room, his sharp, deliberate steps echoing through the space. His face was cold, unreadable, but Lauren knew better than to mistake his silence for indifference. It was the calm before the storm. A technical college? His voice, usually composed and commanding, was laced with quiet fury. He didn't even look at her as he spoke, staring instead at the fire crackling in the oversized stone fireplace. "After all the tutors, the private schooling, the resources at your disposal, this is what you bring to me?" Lauren's throat was dry. "It's a good program," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to study mechanical engineering. I want to build something real, create technology that—" "Enough." He finally turned to her, eyes dark with something dangerously close to disgust. You were supposed to get into Yale or Princeton. You were supposed to do something that reflects this family's name. And instead, you're throwing your future away on, he gestured at the letter with disdain, this. Her mother, Margaret, was seated on the pristine white couch, her nails tapping against the armrest in irritation. She barely glanced up from her phone. I told you, William, she said, exhaling dramatically. She never had the discipline for the Ivy League. Lauren felt the words slice through her, but she swallowed the sting. It wasn't the first time her mother had dismissed her like that, as if her failures were inevitable, as if she had never been enough. I'm not throwing my future away, Lauren said, forcing herself to meet her father's gaze. This is what I love. Engineering. I want to work in sustainable energy, in something that actually you want. His voice was sharp now, his patience gone. You think what you want matters here? He took a step closer, the air between them heavy with unspoken resentment. This family has standards, expectations, and you have done nothing but fail to meet them. Her heart pounded. I didn't fail. Yes, you did. The words were final, delivered like a judge passing sentence. You want to waste your life? Fine, but you'll do it on your own. Lauren felt the floor shift beneath her. What? William turned his back to her, already done with the conversation. You are no longer our responsibility. You won't see another cent from us. A cold wave of panic gripped her, but she refused to let them see it. Dad. Her mother finally looked up from her phone, raising an eyebrow. Don't beg, Lauren. It's pathetic. That was the moment she knew they were serious. By the time she was upstairs, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands, the reality was beginning to sink in. They were cutting her off. Her whole life, the security, the comfort, the illusion of belonging had just been ripped away. She paused for a moment, staring at the photographs on her desk, the ones from childhood, where she had still tried to earn their love. The father who had once held her on his shoulders, the mother who had once brushed her hair before bedtime. But those were just pictures. A different time. A different girl. When she came back down, duffel slung over her shoulder, her parents hadn't moved. Her mother was scrolling through her phone, already bored with her daughter's downfall. Her father was standing by the fireplace, arms crossed. Don't come back, he said simply. She clenched her jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Without another word, she turned and walked out. The night air was cold against her skin as she stepped onto the driveway. There was no one there to say goodbye, no one watching as she left, no one who cared. Lauren's hands were raw from scrubbing down metal workbenches at the small manufacturing plant where she worked nights, her arms sore from lifting crates heavier than she should have been handling alone. The rhythmic hum of the machines around her was both a comfort and a cruel reminder. This wasn't where she had planned to be, but it was where she had to be. After leaving home, she had no trust fund, no safety net, no parents swooping in to make life easier. She had nothing but a duffel bag, a technical college acceptance letter, and the unshakable need to prove she could survive. At first, she had crashed on a friend's couch, stretching every last dollar from her part-time shifts at a diner to pay for tuition and groceries. The early months were brutal, working overnight at the plant, then racing to morning classes with barely 4 hours of sleep. There were nights she wondered if her parents had even noticed she was gone. Had they paused, even for a second, to consider how she was surviving? Did they ever think about the daughter they had so easily discarded? She knew the answer. They didn't. Still, quitting wasn't an option. The one thing Lauren had always clung to, even in the moments of complete exhaustion, was that engineering made sense. The numbers, the mechanics, the way things worked together. It was the only part of her life she could control. And as the months passed, she threw herself deeper into it. One night, she was working in the college's machine shop, the only place she could study without distractions, when her professor, Dr. Patel, noticed her. He had seen her before, Always the last student to leave, always putting in more hours than required. You work harder than most people I've seen, he said, watching as she adjusted the torque on a prototype motor. Why? Lauren hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Because I have to? He nodded as if he understood more than she had said aloud. The next week, he recommended her for a paid internship at a renewable energy startup. It wasn't glamorous, mostly assembling parts and running calculations, but it paid enough to help her move into her own tiny studio apartment. For the first time, she had a space that was truly hers. As the semesters passed, she proved herself. She wasn't just keeping up with her courses, she was excelling. For the first time in her life, she felt seen for something other than a failure. When she earned her associate's degree, it wasn't with her parents in the audience. It was just her, a diploma, and the quiet realization that she had built this future without them. Encouraged by Dr. Patel, she applied for a transfer to MIT. She had no Ivy League connections, no wealthy last name to open doors, but she had her work, and she had her drive. When the acceptance email arrived, she stared at the screen in disbelief before finally exhaling the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was going to MIT, and she had done it entirely on her own. Lauren had spent so much of her life proving people wrong that she barely recognized the moment she had proven herself right. At MIT, she no longer felt like she was simply surviving, she was thriving. The same girl who had once struggled to keep up in high school was now sitting in advanced engineering courses, debating energy efficiency models with some of the sharpest minds in the field. The difference wasn't just intelligence, it was grit. She wasn't there because of privilege or connections. She was there because she had fought tooth and nail for every opportunity. She kept working part-time shifts in research labs, late nights, poring over simulations, presenting at student conferences, whenever she had the chance. She became obsessed with renewable energy storage, knowing that the biggest barrier to clean energy wasn't production, it was efficiency. Her professors took notice. Dr. Patel, now a mentor more than just a professor, encouraged her to pursue a PhD. You have the mind for it, Lauren, he told her, and more importantly, the drive. And so she kept going. Her PhD research focused on developing a next-generation battery system capable of storing solar and wind power at unprecedented levels of efficiency. It was the kind of work that could revolutionize the industry, and she wasn't just a student anymore, she was a leader in the field. By the time she completed her doctorate, she had already published multiple papers, spoken at global energy conferences, and received offers from some of the most prestigious institutions in the world. When the offer from the International Research Institute for Sustainable Energy came, she barely hesitated. In just over a decade, she had gone from being kicked out of her parents' mansion with nothing but a duffel bag to standing at the forefront of the clean energy movement. And yet, through it all, her parents never called. No matter how many awards she won, no matter how many times her name was published in scientific journals, they never acknowledged her success. That was the moment she realized something that should have been obvious all along. Their approval didn't matter anymore. She had built her life without them. The ballroom at the International Energy Summit was a glittering expanse of wealth and prestige, filled with the most influential figures in the energy sector. Lauren sat near the front, her name written in bold letters on the event program, yet she felt strangely out of place. It had been years since she had allowed herself to think about what nights like these once meant to her parents. Status, recognition, the illusion of power. But tonight, this wasn't about them. This was about her, about the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices that had brought her here. The host took the stage, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce this year's recipient of the Global Innovators Award, a pioneer in sustainable energy solutions, whose groundbreaking research is shaping the future of renewable energy. Please welcome Dr. Lauren Hayes. The applause was thunderous. Lauren stood, smoothing the fabric of her gown as she walked toward the stage. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. She had dreamed of something like this once, but the reality of it felt almost surreal. As she reached the podium, she took a steadying breath and began to speak, thanking her mentors, her colleagues, and the students she now had the privilege of guiding. Then the host spoke again. And tonight we are pleased to announce an extraordinary contribution. In recognition of Dr. Hayes' outstanding contributions to sustainable energy, a generous $2 million research grant has been pledged to further her work in developing next-generation energy storage solutions. Lauren's breath hitched. $2 million. The number felt unreal, the sheer magnitude of what it could mean for her research flashing through her mind. But before she could fully process it, the host continued. This generous donation has been made possible through the support of one of the most influential names in industrial manufacturing, Hayes Industries. The room erupted in applause, but Lauren felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. Hayes Industries, her father's company? Her mind raced, struggling to comprehend the irony, the cruel twist of fate. The same man who had thrown her out of his house, who had called her a failure, who had erased her from his life, had unknowingly funded her greatest achievement. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. The room around her blurred, the sound of applause muffled by the roaring in her ears. She forced herself to remain composed, to smile as if this wasn't the most bitter, twisted irony of her life. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him. At the far end of the room, near the exit, William Hayes stood frozen. He had been sitting at one of the VIP tables, likely unaware of who the award recipient would be until this very moment. Their eyes met, and for the first time in 15 years, she saw something crack beneath his usual stone-faced exterior. Disbelief, disgust, and then, without a word, he turned on his heel and walked out. Lauren watched as he disappeared through the ballroom doors, his departure swift and deliberate, as if he couldn't stomach being in the same room as her success. For a moment, all she felt was anger, not sadness, not longing, just rage. That even now, even when faced with undeniable proof of her accomplishments, he still refused to acknowledge her. But then, just as quickly, the anger faded. Because it didn't matter anymore. She had spent years chasing something she no longer needed. His approval, his acceptance, his validation. And as she stood there under the bright lights, holding the plaque that symbolized everything she had built for herself, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had won. Lauren didn't think. She didn't stop to weigh the consequences. She simply moved, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floors as she chased after her father. The moment was too raw, too significant to let him just walk away. For years, she had imagined what she might say if she ever saw him again. If she ever had the chance to look him in the eyes and show him that she had survived without him, but nothing in her mind had prepared her for this moment. By the time she stepped outside, the night air was crisp against her skin, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the gala. There he was, William Hayes, standing beside his sleek black car, his driver holding the door open. He hadn't even bothered to linger, to hear what she had to say. The word left her lips before she could stop it. He didn't turn right away, only sighing heavily before finally glancing over his shoulder. His face was unreadable, but Lauren could see the tightness in his jaw, the irritation simmering beneath the surface. "What is it, Lauren?" he asked, his voice sharp, impatient, as if she were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Lauren took a steadying breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. "That's it. You find out that I'm the one receiving the award, the one whose work you just funded, and you walk out?" His eyes darkened. "I don't fund you. I fund progress. If I had known it was you, I never would have allowed it." Lauren's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she refused to let the anger consume her. "Why?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Because it means admitting that you were wrong about me? William scoffed, shaking his head. You got lucky, he said coldly. That's all this is. You fell into an opportunity, and now you think you're one of us. But nothing's changed, Lauren. You're still the same embarrassment I cut out of my life years ago. She should have felt pain at his words, the same pain she had carried with her for so many years. But instead, standing there beneath the glow of the city lights, all she felt was clarity. She took a step closer, meeting his gaze with unshaken confidence. You don't get to define me anymore, she said, her voice steady. You threw me away. You left me with nothing, and yet here I am, not because of you, in spite of you. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his posture, something rigid, something unsettled. For the first time in her entire life, she saw it. Doubt, and that was enough. Lauren exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. She had come out here thinking she needed to confront him, that she needed closure, but she already had it. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him behind, just like he had once left her. Lauren sat in her hotel room, staring at the open laptop in front of her. The $2 million research grant was hers to use, to fund projects, expand her work, and push the boundaries of sustainable energy innovation. But she didn't want it. Not like this. Not with the weight of her father's name attached to it. The irony was too bitter, the money too tainted. After all these years, she didn't need anything from him. She thought about the young girl she once was, the one who had slept on a friend's couch, worked brutal shifts at a manufacturing plant just to pay for classes, fought tooth and nail for every bit of success she had earned. She had made it here on her own, and there were others like her, students with brilliant minds but no support, kids who had been told they weren't good enough, who had been cast aside because they didn't fit the mold. She knew what she had to do. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed out an email, redirecting every single dollar of the grant towards scholarships for women in STEM, for first-generation college students, for kids who had been overlooked just like she once had. When she finally pressed the send button, a strange sense of peace settled over her. This was more than just an act of defiance. This was her way of taking control. The money her father had unknowingly given her wouldn't serve as some twisted reconciliation. It would serve a greater purpose, one far bigger than him, or even her. That night, Lauren stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. For years, she had thought she needed something from her parents, validation, recognition, closure. But she had been wrong. She had already won the moment she built a life of her own. And this was freedom. Lauren's journey teaches a powerful lesson about self-worth, resilience, and breaking free from the need for external validation. For years, she struggled under the weight of her parents' expectations, believing that success was something she had to prove to them. But in the end, she realized that true success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Her story is a testament to the idea that our past does not define our future. Despite being disowned and left with nothing, she fought her way forward, building a life entirely on her own terms. Her greatest triumph wasn't the award, the recognition, or even the $2 million grant. It was the moment she let go of the need for her father's approval and chose to use her success to uplift others. Lauren's decision to donate the grant instead of keeping it for herself demonstrates that true freedom comes when we detach ourselves from the opinions of those who never believed in us. Instead of seeking revenge or validation, she redirected her pain into purpose. Her story is a reminder that the best way to move forward is to build something greater than the pain we leave behind.